Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TCG Folk, and for the first time in 15 months, we are back doing these interviews in person, this week talking with meteorologist Sven Sundgaard. Sven and I talk about the digital platforms he's talking weather on, his interim job teaching at Heilicher Minneapolis Jewish Day School, and celebrating Pride as a very public figure on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Sven Sundgaard, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast, the first in-person interview I've done for the show in like 15 months at this point. This is great. I'm so excited. How are you?
Good. It's still weird seeing people without masks on, and the mandates have just dropped and you don't know what to do. It isn't bizarre. I've done a bunch of these through Zoom, but it is not the same.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, we were talking just before we started. The technology has definitely gotten better. Zoom, Zencastr, the program we had been using for the video, had video, gets really good audio quality, but it's not the same. The three-dimensional is always better than the two-dimensional.
Absolutely. That third dimension for sure.
So really excited to talk to you. Been hoping to try to get something, get this going with you for a little while now. Part of the impetus for why right now is that you just announced yesterday, as we are recording this on Wednesday the 2nd, announced that you are part of a new venture called Tomorrow Minneapolis. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how that all came together.
Well, those of us involved are still figuring it out too, which makes it kind of exciting. So this is a project that was started by Eric Holthaus, who is a climate scientist. And he got in the ear of somebody at Twitter. I don't know how, but Twitter was all about it. You've probably noticed kind of a trend. Facebook is doing this too, but they want to have like local writers and content providers, providing stuff for people in specific markets rather than, just like some nationally famous person doing it.
Right.
And so that's where it's sort of this grassroots, picking a meteorologist in each metropolitan area or market and saying, you're going to be the go-to expert here, provide, it's going to start initially as basically a 100-word weather forecast summary, and people sign up for the email. And then eventually we would like to do video, do some more journalism. I know he's got a couple people on board who are going to do social justice and climate justice stories and pieces that'll be involved in addition to just your daily weather. But adding, which I already do anyway, adding a climate angle to a forecast every day too, because daily there is some climate change angle to anything that's happening around us.
And I noticed that even watching the forecast that you had done for today on Bring Me the News, you talk about how the average, the temperature increase over time in summer is lower than it is in other seasons. In fact, I think you said that it's half of what it is in the winter.
Yep.
Over a period of time. So I do think that's interesting. That's sort of a very subtle way to bring an important, very important topic, obviously climate change, and how that is affecting everything. And I think the interesting thing you mentioned is the social justice, climate justice angles that's coming to this new venture. I think that's going to be a real interesting place to be able to have those kinds of important conversations.
Yeah, and I hope to bring a lot in that regard too. One of the many hats and projects I've been working on in the last year is with the Minneapolis Foundation. And this year they're doing a big push in their fundraising and efforts towards environmental justice and the inequities when it comes to climate change and environmental issues. Climate change and environmental degradation doesn't affect everybody equally. If
Right.
you are a wealthy person, you're going to be okay. You can move or you can modify. But poor neighborhoods, it's just simple things of like, where do we put incinerators? And then there's the whole climate change angle. We know that a lot of impoverished people live along coastlines that are going to be more subjected to tropical storms and sea level rise. Mm-hmm. And so I've actually found that to be fascinating. I'm learning a lot on that front. I know the climate science and the meteorology, but learning the social justice component to climate change in our own community in Minneapolis has been fascinating. And so I hope to bring some of that as well.
how does that play out for a place like Minneapolis or the Twin Cities, or I guess Minnesota even in general? We're pretty landlocked. I mean, with the exception of the North Shore, we have Lake Superior, but
it's not going to go up.
Right, it's not going anywhere. We're not a coastal city one way or the other. So how do things like the changes in climate long term, how can that affect an area like ours?
The things that we're going to look to, one of the problems we're going to have to face as Minnesotans is, as you mentioned, we're going to look more and more attractive from a real estate perspective, because this is a place with 4 seasons. We're still going to have winter. Mm-hmm. We've seen winters get milder. They're going to get more mild. We're still going to have extremes, because this is an extreme part of the world. Basically us in Siberia have some of the most volatile weather and seasons on the planet. That's still going to be around. But yeah, we're immune from sea level rise, obviously, and some of the extreme heat that is just going to become insufferable in parts of the South. So you think of the big cities in Texas where it's already disgustingly hot and I love the heat, but not if I had it for 6 to 9 months. That kind of thing is going to become more of an issue. But I think the changes that we're going to see as Minnesotans are going to be the ones, and Minnesotans are good at identifying these. Do we want Minnesota to be the Minnesota that we know and grew up in? I talk to people, the polar bear has become sort of the poster child icon of global climate change. Mm-hmm. But in Minnesota, we can look to the moose. And moose are really on the front lines of climate change. And I don't want to live in a Minnesota that doesn't have that Northwoods icon anymore. And we're at a real risk of losing moose, because this is the southernmost part of their range. They're really susceptible to parasites and diseases because they're stressed in a warmer world. So I think a lot of the issues we're going to be working on as Minnesotans is trying to preserve the species and flora and fauna that are native to our state. Mm-hmm. Makes Minnesota Minnesota. We're the land of 10,000 plus lakes. Well, those lakes are changing, and they're going to become a little more toxic and less abundant in biodiversity, and I don't think anybody wants that.
No, not at all. And that's interesting. It just brings up angles that, it's something that I know about, and it obviously is concerning, but really had no sense of just how bad a situation it is. And you're right, the polar bear becomes sort of because you see, these gorgeous pictures of the ice caps, but as they fracture, and the polar bear sort of sitting on these ice floes with nowhere to go because of the fracturing of the in the Arctic. And so
thanks to Coca-Cola made them cute and cuddly, but they're the largest predator on land, and I mean they're the top of the food chain, and you don't want to be next to one in the wild, but there's sort of just an iconic species, and on the smaller scale, we can look to moose, and you can look to Africa towards, a rhinoceros. They live in dry, hot places. They've evolved to handle that, but we're turning the dials too quickly in such a way that a lot of these species, including our own, are just not going to be able to adapt on that time scale.
So one of the things you mentioned when we started trying to get this scheduled is that you're teaching right now at the Heilicher Minneapolis Jewish Day School. Is that, you talk very passionately about the climate change. Is that a lot about what this unit that you've been teaching since you started in March has been all about?
Yeah, so, their full-time science teacher had a great opportunity and had to leave, and they were left, in the middle of the school year during COVID, needing to fill a void with 7th and 8th graders. And I don't have a biology background specifically or a teaching license, but I can communicate and know a lot about earth science and specifically weather and climate. And they said, teach whatever you want. And I said, well, let's do a climate change curriculum. So I had to create a curriculum, which was fun, around climate change for middle schoolers. And I have to say, first of all, I've been blown away just how smart these kids are, how much they knew already, which was great.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to go deeper into more complicated topics because they already knew quite a bit. So they have there's a great system working here, but it's been fun and challenging, I'll say, not just because it's middle schoolers, but building a curriculum and keeping them entertained for 80 minutes, but a fun challenge. It's something that I hadn't really done before. I mean, I talked to schools in the past a lot, but not for more than 30 minutes.
Right.
And if they were a bad group, you could leave and never go back.
That's right. Was teaching ever something that you were interested in, or is this sort of like a kind of happenstance situation.
Yeah, no, it really is. I never really thought about teaching kids so much, but I have always told people part of why I went into broadcasting is that I enjoy sharing knowledge with people. And I really do love giving climate change seminars and updates to adult groups, and have done that. I've taught meteorology classes at my alma mater, St. Cloud State, before. So I've done that. Kids are a unique challenge, of course, but I really have enjoyed that. And that was ultimately what got me into the field that I did, because people don't really quite realize meteorology is a very broad field. Broadcast is just one sliver of it. Communicating the weather is one sliver. There's research, there's working in the National Weather Service, there's working for an airline, all sorts of things that you can apply weather to. Of course, it affects everything and everybody. But ultimately, I was scared to death of sitting in front of a computer all day and not being able to share the joy of the next blizzard or, severe weather or whatever. We all like to complain about the weather too, but also just, we're all kind of in it together, and just to be able to communicate it with people, even if it's a one-way conversation, whether it's, it's usually just a camera, it's still, there's feedback at least.
Do you ever get used to people giving you grief about, your hit or miss rate on the weather?
I have some good comebacks usually over time. I like to tell people, well, I think we do better than your average doctor, because they have a closed system that's exposed to a larger system, but they're, practicing medicine. A lot of times it's a hit and miss guess. And I think we do pretty well, considering we're looking at an entire globe and a very dynamic system that, admittedly, we're still learning a lot from.
That's fair. I had this conversation with other meteorologists, and when the weather is bad, there's a huge blizzard, you take the blame for it.
Yeah,
like as if you had some sort of control.
Or the heat coming up. Minnesotans do not like heat.
You don't say.
I love it, but yeah, no, I have no control over it. If I did, the weather here would look a lot different a lot of the time.
So what's your ideal weather?
And
then?
I would have a lot more money in the checking account.
Well, wouldn't we all? What's your ideal weather?
I do like our 4 seasons, but I love summer, and I think the whole pandemic has made summer even more wonderful, because even last summer when we were in the thick of it, the one thing we had at least was summer. Yeah. You could get outside and be outside and do things outside still. So I love a good hot humid day, but as I've said, if it were like this, like in Houston or Atlanta, no way for too long. But we get breaks. It's not that long. But I enjoy winter too. I do like all our 4 seasons. It keeps things mixed up. You never get too used to anything. You can't get bored.
No, that's very true.
Boredom is not a thing with our weather.
Very true. So the Tomorrow Minneapolis thing is a very digitally focused product. I also mentioned Bring Me the News. You've been doing the weather on their Facebook page, on their website now for about 8-10 months now, a little bit longer.
I think probably is. It is about 10 months.
Is it the pandemic has really warped all
time?
It doesn't
matter.
No,
2020 wasn't 12 months either. It was more like 15
at least. Yeah. So you have this experience in the digital weather space. You've also obviously your experience on a TV set also. How does the medium change how you work to convey the message and sort of the education you're trying to give people about what's coming up, or not really?
Yeah, it does. And I've actually had this conversation a few times with other people, and I actually really enjoy the digital aspect more, because there's more feedback, and there has to be more feedback. You're looking at people's comments, and they're asking questions, and they're giving you more input, and you can kind of tailor what you're doing towards that. And it allows you, there's no time limits either.
Right.
Like yesterday and today, my weather has been a maximum of 3.5 to 4 minutes, because it's just going to get hot. That's about it. That's basically it. And then I throw in some climate change news or whatever. But, during a snowstorm or next week, potentially when it gets a little more active as far as severe weather, those weathers might be 6 minutes. Well, you're never allowed that on TV, even in this market.
No, I mean, unless the sirens are going outside, you never get that kind of time.
Yeah. And you get the feedback if you go online and somebody took the effort to post on your wall about something you just put on TV. But this is, the video's there, they comment directly to the video, or at a specific point in the video when they saw something. And my favorite was when people will ask in the middle of the video, what's the weather going to be in Alexandria on Saturday, as if I was going to mention or be able to respond right then and there to that. But
I was just going to ask, how much real-time banter do you try to have in that situation?
I don't in the thick of the weather, but I'm launching some more stuff. There's gonna be a lot of overlap with what I'm doing with Bring Me the News tomorrow, and then I'm launching some subscription weather content soon through Patreon and probably Facebook subscriptions, where I can go more in depth. And I want to specifically have a Thursday weather Q&A where we talk about some weather or climate news of the week, and then open it up for, hey, what questions do you have? And that's where I can really dive into, hey, you know what, I saw this, send a picture. I saw this cloud. What the heck was that? How did that form? I've never seen it before. Or, hey, the temperature was this, and then it went up to that, and then it dropped again, and I was 50 miles from Lake Superior. Did that have any influence? Or, something like that. People have all sorts of weather questions all the time, and that would allow me to really get into that. Or even get into the, hey, I'm going to the cabin, and what's it going to be like Sunday? I see on my app there's a raindrop, but what does that really mean?
Right.
And then I can dive into the weather forecast more there, too.
I mean, and you mentioned the cabin. The cabin, I mean,
Is
in
life.
summer in Minnesota, that is rite of passage.
Yep. The weeks are only 4 days all summer long.
Oh, absolutely. And not that we have a cabins are one of those things, like, I don't want my own. I would like friends to invite us to theirs.
Yeah.
Like, I have a hard enough time with my one home. I don't really need a second to open and close during the year.
Yeah, double the yard work. I don't think so.
I don't enjoy the yard work I have at the moment.
My parents bought a lake place when they retired, and that's where I go. So I call that my cabin. But yeah, he can maintain that and everything, and mow the lawn, and I'll buy the beer.
That seems like a great trade-off.
Yeah, it works for him.
I'm sure it does. So, one of the really interesting things is that I found, about you is, as you started entering the TV market here, I would have friends who would go to like the JFCS benefit every year and post these pictures with you in. I'm like, Sven, just one of the folk hanging out at these events. I know that you're a Jew by choice. You converted. Mm-hmm. What was it that led you to Judaism?
Oh boy, how long are these? 2 hours?
We got as much time as you want. Much time as you want to talk. We're good.
It was really a long process. I'm a scientist, obviously, so I like to logically think about things, and religion in general, you have to check a certain amount of logical reasoning at the door. It's a leap of faith, no matter what, right? But I've always been very spiritual, and I just not to diss any religion, but Christianity never made sense to me, and I didn't come from a particularly religious family, and it was kind of a series of events colliding with one another, and I would have friends or people I was dating, I would find out they're Jewish. I'm like, why am I friends or attracted to all these Jewish people? And I just, whatever, okay. And then 2009, I was planning a big trip. This is the beginning of what's become a ton of international travel, which obviously stopped last year. And I was planning to go to Egypt and Greece and visit family in Norway. Big surprise, right? And then a friend of mine who I had met in the U.S. but never in Israel, obviously, but they're Israelis, said, well, you should come to Israel. It's on the way. And I'm like, okay, so what? And a lot of people who didn't know much about Israel, I thought, well, is it safe? And do I have to jump over barbed wire? Or, had no idea. Right. And I'm like, well, I'm really squeezing a lot already into basically this is 15 days, Egypt, Greece, Norway. Oh, let's throw Israel in too.
And it's not like those are, they can sort of
scratch
be on
the surface.
Way,
yeah,
but
yeah.
You can't really go in depth anywhere on that kind of trip.
No. And I do that a lot. And then I go back to places that I enjoy and say, okay, I want to see more of it. Egypt, I've been to 3 times.
Wow. Okay, cool.
There's a lot to see there, obviously. Yeah. But so I said, okay, fine, I'll go to Israel. But I said, I just want to, obviously I want to see Jerusalem. I want to float in the Dead Sea. I knew nothing about Tel Aviv. I hardly saw Tel Aviv that first trip. And now it's one of my favorite cities in the world. But, that it literally sort of changed my life. I felt, as strange as it sounds, again, I'm a scientist, felt like I had been there before, belonged there. There's so this odd spiritual aspect to it. And then, even then I didn't think about conversion really. That was sort of a slow process. I reached out to a Rabbi Latz at Shir Tikva, and had talked about, just wider spiritual questions. And it just sort of led to this path where, eventually I'm like, oh, maybe I wonder if that's an option. And I experienced the first holidays I experienced were the High Holy Days, and I found them profoundly meaningful. Whereas, what I grew up with, the big holidays, Christmas, it's, Jesus' birthday, give me stuff. And then, Easter eggs, and, none of it was meaningful to me. But, like Yom Kippur, that's serious stuff.
Yeah.
And you come away with that, re-examining life and the meaning of everything.
Did you find...
That's the short version,
okay.
basically.
Did you find that you were, for lack of a better word, maybe lacking meaning in some sort of spiritual way? Or did it just sort of hit you that, oh, maybe I didn't know I was looking for this, but this is what I was looking for all along?
Yeah, I don't know that I don't know that I was really looking for it. Like I say, I would consider myself to be spiritual. Obviously I'm not Orthodox. But, even when after college and working in my first job and moving back to the Twin Cities, I tried to give the Lutheran Church a second chance. That's where I grew up. And great religion, progressive religion and everything, but just, it just didn't, nothing really clicked. And so then I sort of gave up on that again. And, I wasn't really looking for anything. It kind of looked for me. And I guess that's the way I look at it, is something bigger than me was guiding me along that way. And, I know it sounds strange, but that's just sort of, and then as I learned that, the traditional, teaching is that somebody who converts was actually Jewish, but we know that so many Jewish souls were lost historically, but that every Jewish soul was at Sinai at one point, and that really clicked with me and sort of made sense to, what otherwise doesn't make sense. And in fact, one of the things that I do after the formal process of, a year plus of conversion was talking in front of the congregation at Shir Tikva and just sort of explaining your story. And I titled it how a Viking traded his helmet of horns for a kippah. That was because awesome. Otherwise nothing really made sense about it. But since I found out, and I'm still digging, I'm really into genealogy, which is just one of many things that makes me a supreme nerd. But my grandmother comes from a part of Southwest Germany where we think there were probably some Jewish ancestors there that converted at some point. So there might be an actual genetic link somewhere there too.
Wow.
But, yeah.
That's very cool.
Got to do the DNA test. See, my boyfriend tries to joke. He took a DNA test, and he's like a supreme mutt because he's also half El Salvadorian. He's Spanish, Irish, 6% Ashkenazi Jewish. So he says, "Oh, I'm more Jewish," and I'm like, "No, I converted, so now I'm 100%." But so I want to get the DNA test and at least be 7% or something.
Okay. Listen,
you never know. That is the DNA has shown a lot of crazy things.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, that's a perfectly good goal.
Not in my father, though. He took it, and he was exactly what we thought. Mostly Swedish, and then the rest was Norwegian.
Okay. Listen, bragging rights is good in a household. I think that's perfectly suitable.
Yep.
No problem.
That keeps the peace.
Absolutely. No, that's got to get the leg up there. Yep. That makes perfect sense. So going through the conversion process, you're already working on TV at that point. You're a very public figure. You are very recognizable. Does that change, not necessarily the meaning, but just sort of, did it change the process at all for you? Did it make it feel any differently because you are a public persona?
I think there were definitely some awkward moments in the first few years because you're like, they want to do segments with Santa or whatever, and you're like, I don't really feel comfortable doing that, Yeah. I got to a point where I'm like, well, I can separate, this is a segment for TV, but at the beginning I was like, I just, not comfortable at first with that at all. So it was more like a lot of awkward moments like that.
And that, like, Santa, I mean, At least in my
Santa's is
interpretation.
a pagan, silly thing anyway.
I was going to say Santa's, to me, there's nothing religious at all.
No.
About Santa, but
No, if you wanted me to hold up a crucifix in in front of the chroma key, now that's getting really pushing the limits. Yeah.
Yeah, which that's fine. So the other, this month, it's June, it's Pride Month.
Well, this year it's like 2 months because they moved Twin Cities Pride to mid-July. So, yeah.
I think 2 months of Pride is great. I feel like that is the least we are all owed after last year.
Oh, totally.
But being a very public figure as you are, did that sort of alter your coming out process or how you are in public as an out gay man?
Definitely more careful in the beginning. You have to remember, when I started in TV in the Twin Cities, and I'd been in Duluth for 2.5 years before that. That was a different time, 2003 to 2006. Remember we were still Republicans were still putting a marriage amendment on the ballot in 2012, which we defeated, luckily.
Yes.
But there were still 40+% that said no. Marriage should not be on the table for LGBTQ folks, and so that's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
And that was 6 years into my tenure here. So, it was different for sure in the beginning. But you just like anything, as you become more comfortable and realize you got to be yourself, and this is me. And one of the things people had always told me is, you seem who you are on air and off air, and that authenticity, that's part of who you are, And luckily I can say I didn't face a lot of pushback in the public. I mean, there were lots of nasty things, of course, you get from people, but, overall I would say I think I had a pretty decent experience from the public side of it.
You've never, I've noticed this, from your social media, from your Twitter, from your Facebook, you were kind enough, I guess 5 years ago, to write a piece for us in the wake of the Pulse nightclub tragedy, and Golden Valley Pride happened to be that same weekend. You wrote a great piece for us. We'll have it linked in the show notes. You are this very public figure, and I keep sort of coming back to that, but you are very outspoken in your social media. You are who you are. You are authentically you. Do you find a lot of, not necessarily the blowback, because I think that is unfortunately to be expected and we don't need to dwell on the negative, but do you find a lot of people, maybe particularly even, teens or younger folks who see you being yourself, coming to you for advice in this way? And how do you approach that?
Some of the greatest messages that only encourage you on your path is, now I have friends who are, I'm 40, but I have some friends who are in their 20s and who would say to me at some point, after we'd known each other a long time, said, I was able to come out because you were out on TV. And you're like, really? A kid who grows up in Mora, Minnesota, pretty conservative area, conservative parents, and it made it possible because the parents could see somebody who they felt that they kind of knew, because people feel that way about people on TV. And, I get a lot of those messages, and that it's really sort of, wow. Yeah. Because I didn't really have that. I had some national celebrities when I was that age, but there was nobody locally really doing that. And it would have been hard to locally. It's one thing to have made your millions as a celebrity and then say, oh, I'm gay, and then you can take that risk and that leap. It's another thing to be, a middle class employee and risk everything. At that time in the 90s, you could have risked everything.
Right. And it's funny because
there's still some states where you can be fired for being gay.
That's right. It's really, it's sort of fascinating to think about it in that way, but like, you're right. It's all that time, we're not even 10 years post the marriage attempt to ban marriage here. It's, it's still, we think of Minnesota as this really progressive place, and it probably isn't as, it's more of like an idealization that people sort of put out there. Like, oh, it's this, progressive state. And it's like, the cities are progressive, but once you get outside of, you went to school in St. Cloud. Like once you get up, not that far up 94,
different part of the world.
It's a different world.
I remember I took 6 years of German, in high school. And I remember my German teacher telling me, well, that's a different part of the state. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? And I learned what she meant. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Minnesota is indicative of the country, very polarized, and it's very much an urban-rural divide. And, let's go back to talking about, speaking out on things. I do try to, I know some people think I'm political, but I try to keep what I'm talking about social justice issues.
Yeah.
So if you think Black Lives Matter is a political thing, I'm sorry, that's your problem. Black Lives Matter. If you think, gay issues is a problem, that's your problem. That's social justice. It shouldn't be political. Now, if somebody wants to make it political, then that's their thing. Or the rise of right-wing extremism shouldn't be a political thing.
Right. And it's funny. This is for better or worse, beginning of June is the time when you have I think heartfelt, but also in a lot of ways performative changes of people's, especially corporations, Twitter profile pics of
jump on the bandwagon.
Right. They put on the rainbow, and even, I'm a big Minnesota United soccer fan, and they did that. And of course, one of the first comments was, so when is heterosexual Pride Month?
Yeah.
Like, come
Well, that's the why do Black Lives matter, not all
lives
it's
matter.
The same,
right.
It's the same argument.
100% the same argument. It's just, it's such an asinine conversation to be having.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, this is the stupid crap that invades what should otherwise be a meaningful, important month for so many who are out and proud and those who are trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah, and I think there's a responsibility to us in the gay community to, we've come a long way in a short period of time, really, which is incredible, and that also makes us responsible to making sure that other people and groups that are, discriminated against get to the point that we're at. So that's one of the things I think. I've had this theory forever, and I've been kind of working on a project that hopefully we get going with a friend of mine who's African American and also gay, and I've had a theory, and actually what's kind of helped me see this is Tel Aviv Pride, that gay people can bring together everybody, because there's nothing else, there's no other marginalization that crosses every ethnicity, religion, nationality. So maybe we are the key to world peace, maybe the key to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I don't know, or key to some of the issues that black people face in America. Maybe we can help bridge that divide, because we know what it's like to be marginalized, but yet I'm a white male, I have a foot in that world too,
right?
So that's I don't know, I think maybe the recipe is there for doing something.
Well, I'm super excited to see what that project looks like. And I'm just sort of, I am impressed and amazed and in awe of, there's only 24 hours in a day, and you have so many things that are percolating right now.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's been great though. Wasn't able to do all these things before. So it's nice to have. Oh, and I also I'm a licensed realtor too. So that's one of the things I worked on during the pandemic. But yeah, very different things, so that you can't really get bored of one. So that's good.
That is phenomenal, and I don't know how you have the time for it all. It's amazing.
Well, yeah, I'm making it work.
That's awesome. All right, last two questions, and we're going to let you get out of here, because I think we could go on for many hours, but I'm not sure everybody's going to listen to that. What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
My favorite Jewish holiday is Yom Kippur, and I know that's probably not a common thing. It's just because it's so meaningful.
It's more common than you think.
I know
honestly.
Most people, it's a nostalgic, it's Passover or something, like that, but which is great. But I love the traditions. I love that Judaism also doesn't pretend to know all the answers, right. Whereas too many religions say this is what you believe, done. In fact, the fact that you have rabbis arguing about everything, which way to light the menorah or anything, is great.
And they want you to question it.
Yes.
I mean, for millennia, they literally have been arguing over the minutia, and it's great. That's fantastic. All right, and favorite.
As a scientist, I can identify with that. So
But I would think that would have to be hard a little bit because, like, a lot of science, there are some exacting parts to science. And
Yes.
this is
There's some things that are subtle.
and this is not like religion, especially Judaism, is not.
Nope.
It's not exacting. It's not subtle. It's
One of the oldest and one of the definitely not settled.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And lastly, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Favorite Jewish food? Oh boy. Hamantaschen. I'm a sweets person. I was thinking, I'm like, it's got to be something. I got to think of something unhealthy. My boyfriend loves gefilte fish. I can't. Gross. To me, it's just like lutefisk.
Yeah, I was going to say it's lutefisk.
It's fish jello.
This is what
Who
you
likes
grew up-
fish jello? I don't care what group it comes from, but he loves it. Yeah, no, and latkes. I mean, because you deep fry anything.
Deep
but
fried
yeah,
potatoes, like
I like a good cookie and fill it with fruit.
Sure.
Done.
Do you have a favorite filling for your hamantaschen?
Really anything. I've had pretty much everything, I think, and I like them all.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Sven Sundgaard, multi-hyphenate, meteorologist / teacher / digital media.
I mean, it only
You
makes
know,
sense, to have a Norwegian Jewish kid too, right?
Sure.
Whatever. Just to make the resume as long as possible.
That's right. It is, and it is a long one. But
If you find another Jewish Sven in the world, let me know.
oh, that would be a fantastic meeting. Love to be there for that one. Well, Sven, thank you so much. Very excited to be able to do this. Excited to be doing these in person. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, get your shot, by the way.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.